Hi, folks. Welcome. We're going to get started in just a little bit. Okay, hey, Poppy, do you want to go ahead and get things started?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining our very first workshop of Indy Design Week. We're kicking off homeworks, and this is a program I'm really passionate about and so grateful for the partnership with the Columbus Design Institute and their team. They've done an awesome job organizing everything. I do want to thank our sponsors for Indy Design Week. It wouldn't be possible without the support of my employer, SEP, and Salesforce. They've both given us many resources in kind and in terms of dollars. So very thankful for them. And I will let Richard introduce the day.
Yeah, great. Well, thanks, Poppy, and thanks to everyone at Indy Design Week for allowing us to try something new. And so what we wanted to do was to create a program that sort of responded to the very moment that we're in now, and to look at some of the challenges that we're facing as a set of communities around the state and around the country, and to think about ways in which design and community intersect, and to really unpack some of the most challenging parts of that. And so what we've done with Homeworks is create a 4-part series that investigates this, and then on the 5th day, kind of look back very quickly on what we've learned. And so today, we're gonna start this series, and I'm really excited about it. It's been a fun way for us to make some new friends and to reconnect with some old ones. But today we're talking about social connectivity. Tomorrow we're going to talk about public space. On Wednesday we're going to talk about home life, and on Friday food systems. Or I'm sorry, on Thursday food systems, and on Friday we're going to sum it up with Rick Valicenti, sort of looking back at what we did. Just to say, all of these sessions are recorded and will be archived on the Indy Design Week Homeworks webpage. And so we hope that this becomes content that evolves over time and we can look back on. And so I'm really grateful for all of the participants today to take some time and to think about ideas of social connectivity and what this means at this moment of this global emergency. And so to that end, we've invited 5 very special guests to think about that from a perspective of academics to policy to initiatives, and then also to think about community organizers. And you're going to meet those folks along this 2-hour presentation. And so I'm really excited about that. I'm going to introduce the first one in a minute, but I'm going to throw it actually back to Poppy, because this is Indy Design Week, and Poppy has some interesting ideas on how to have us connect a little bit for folks that can in an interesting way using some interesting software. Poppy, could you tell us about Miro?
There, I was on mute. So thank you so much. I should be sharing my screen now for the Miro board. I'm going to drop this link in the chat. I'll do that right now. And the Miro board is a way for us to think about the day's activities. So this will be our archive. You'll be able to see other people in here as well. If you don't have an account, you can make a free one, and people will see your name pop up by your cursor, but it's not necessary. You can interact as a guest. You can also use that link and get to it on a mobile phone or an iPad and be able to add information in here. So all of the homework that you were assigned to read is archived here in the board, and there's links to it for if you want to read it in context, maybe grab some of the links or some of the text. These are just images, but you could read them right here to get a good overview of where the context of the conversation is. And then during each speaker, we invite you to add your highlights. So you can just double click and you can add text, or you could copy this board, just like a Control Copy V, and add your own information, right? A key takeaway or a quote that really spoke to you. We'd love to see what you find interesting from these speakers. And then when we go into breakout rooms, that's where you and your breakouts are going to archive your conversations so that we can all see it and have a good representation of the conversation we're going to have.
It's an interesting way for us to explore connecting. One of the things that, you know, one of the things I've been thinking about in this program is, like, any program you go to, you usually go with a friend or you go with a group and you have a kind of side chat along the way. You whisper to your friend, I like that, I didn't like that, or, oh, do you believe they said that? And so it's really a way for you to sort of comment as things are going. But it's also, you know, we certainly encourage you to text your friends while this is going on, or communicate in any other ways that you can to try to make a connection in that way. And certainly we encourage folks to use Twitter and to talk about it in that way. And so I just want to do one final housekeeping thing. I don't have to tell anyone in this program where the exits or the bathrooms are, or make sure the speakers have their own water. I think we're all self-contained here, which is fun. But just to say, thanks so much for coming. We're glad that you're willing to try this with us. And I also want to thank a sponsor that helped us put this together, the Central Indiana Community Foundation. And so this is an interesting way for us to explore some things together. So just a lot of gratitude and thanks all around. And what we're going to do now is kick off this session with a conversation, or a start with Brea Perry from Indiana University. She's going to sort of lead us off, and Brea, on a short notice, decided to join us. She has to leave about 2 or so, but so just to introduce you first, Brea, she's a professor of sociology and the associate vice provost for Indiana University Research. Began her career at the University of Kentucky before returning to Indiana University in 2014, where she received her PhD in 2008. Her research investigates the interrelated roles of social networks, biomarkers, social psychology, and social inequality, health and illness, with a particular focus on mental illness and substance use disorders. She has a strong interest in research, and we're awfully glad to have her here today. Hi, Brea.
Hi. Hello, everyone. It's nice to, I guess, not meet you, but be seen in front of you. Thanks so much for inviting me to this event. I've never been part of anything like this before, and it's exciting to sort of get out of the typical ivory tower type context in which I'm generally trapped. So I'm going to talk to you today about social connectedness and COVID-19 and some of the concerns about social connectedness and quarantine and similar policies from the academic world or the research world. So I'm going to share my screen now, and then I will come back eventually. All right, let's see if this works. Is that working? Yeah? Okay. All right, so as I said, I'm going to talk to you today about social connectedness and COVID-19. And this is something that as soon as the mandates, the stay-at-home mandates came down from states, we as sociologists became really concerned about what the consequences would be for individuals, and particularly individuals who either are caregivers or who live alone, or people who are generally could potentially be vulnerable to social isolation. So we immediately began engaging in what's called a rapid response research project to try to study how social connectedness and social interactions between people had changed since the COVID-19 pandemic. So I'm going to start by talking to you a little bit about social connectedness and health in general, because we know as sociologists and a lot of social scientists study how social connectedness in general affects people's mental and physical health outcomes. So we'll start there, and then I'll tell you a little bit about the research that we've been doing and provide some sort of hot off the presses, high level findings, preliminary findings. So for a variety of reasons, social connectedness is among the most important factors in human health. Our brains, our bodies are literally designed to be social creatures. We have social brains that both require and expect interactions with others. Our emotional health, physical health is highly dependent on our interactions with others. And there are a variety of different ways that we interact with others that are good and also bad for us. So for example, we often get access to resources and material goods through people in our social networks. Things like access to housing, money, information, information about jobs, things like that. And we can imagine that those kinds of resources might be particularly critical during the COVID-19 pandemic when many people are losing their jobs, maybe housing insecure or food insecure. So understanding how people are getting and giving support during this pandemic is really important. In addition to sort of those material goods, we also get lots of other kinds of social support from people in our social networks, including emotional support. When we're feeling bad, people listen to us. And those things are really important for health. They release oxytocin, they reduce levels of cortisol in your system. So actually talking to others, hugging, bonding, even petting a dog or a cat has all these beneficial sort of social bonding related health effects. I'll skip over to social engagement. So when we interact with others, it provides physical and cognitive exercise. And we think as sociologists that the type of exercise that it provides when you're interacting over something like Zoom is probably fundamentally different than when you're interacting in person. When you have to interpret people's body language, it's just much more complicated and more provides more sort of eustress or positive stress when you're interacting with a group of people in person relative to Zooming or talking on the phone or emailing. And then finally, social networks have influence on us. So they affect our behaviors. So networks are important in the era of COVID, in so much as you may get ideas about what kinds of behaviors are safe and unsafe from other people that you're talking to regularly. So lots of different ways and reasons why we should care about what's happening with regard to social connectedness during the pandemic. So in terms of how social connectedness affects health, these are results from what's called a meta-analysis. which is when you take lots of different data from hundreds of different studies and you combine them together to try to understand sort of the effects of certain risk or protective factors across lots of different kinds of samples. And so in this study, what they did is these researchers compared the effect of social relationships on mortality to other major risk factors for death. So if you look at the top 3 bars, those are findings related to measures of social integration or social support. These are sort of different facets of social connectedness. And then below that, you see what we sort of think of as the major causes of death. So smoking, stopping smoking, excessive drinking, getting vaccinated, cardiac rehabilitation, exercise, BMI, drug treatment for hypertension, and air pollution. And so what you can see from this is that social relationships and sort of social integration have a much larger effect on mortality than all of these other sort of individual level behavioral risk factors that we think about as being major causes of disease. So we as a society really should be thinking, I think, first and foremost about social connectedness and its impact on health and how that might vary across different populations who are at risk for social isolation and loneliness. Here's another example on the more sort of biological side of things. And I love this study just because I like the idea of a rat park. So this researcher, Alexander, did this really interesting research where he either took rats and put them essentially in isolation without a lot of cognitive or social stimulation in these boxes on the left, or he put them in these rat parks. So it's like, you know, Disneyland for rodents, where there's lots of stuff to play with and things to look at, and most importantly, other rats to interact with. And so then they did all these experiments to try to identify what happened to the rats when they were in these different social environments. And what they found is that if you take away community and if you take away all of the social and cognitive stimulation and all of the natural positive hormones that are generated by social interaction, that these rats became depressed. Yes, rats can become depressed. If you've ever had a pet rat, you know that. And they started engaging in more substance use. So they started self-administering cocaine and becoming more aggressive and more anxious. So there are all these sort of both social studies and animal studies which tell us that something about social connectedness is fundamental for health. So now I want to turn to just sort of a quick peek at some of the research that we're doing at IU around social connectedness and health in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic. So the data that I'll show you today come from what's called the person-to-person health interview study, which is this kind of unprecedented face-to-face probability sample of about 1,600 residents. And we started this study prior to COVID-19. So we have really rich data, lots of psychosocial data, but also things like genetics and other biomarkers before and now during COVID-19. And we're going to also collect these data after COVID-19. So this gives us a really great understanding of what happens to the same individual if we follow them over time before, during, and after the epidemic. And this is sort of gold standard social science rather than some of the ad hoc internet surveys that you probably have seen going around, because this is representative of the population of Indiana as a whole. And the goal of this COVID-19 rapid response research project is to understand what are the secondary social, economic, and health effects of this pandemic and the related policies and restrictions. So of course, we're interested in how many people get COVID-19 and what are the behaviors that we could do to reduce that transmission. But we're also really worried about what happens to people when they're socially isolated, what happens to people when they lose their jobs, when they're food insecure, etc. So one of the things we were really interested in this study is whether people engage in more or less social activity than they did before the epidemic. And I have to say, I analyzed these data this morning for this talk, and I was shocked by the results. So So this is various forms of social exchange or social support. And we asked them, are you more likely to discuss personal problems than you were before the COVID-19 pandemic? And about 35% of Indiana residents say they discuss their personal problems with other people more than they did during the pandemic. 53% discuss their health more than they did during the pandemic. 67% are getting advice and information more than they did prior to the pandemic. And 78% report helping others more than they did during the pandemic. So while we expected to see increased social isolation, that is not what we're seeing, at least on average. So I'm going to talk a little bit later about how I think that there are probably some pretty vast differences or disparities across social groups in these outcomes. But overall, sociologists are sort of used to being like the downer science. Like, we don't usually have a lot of good news. We just study kind of what sucks in the world, really, to be perfectly honest, and how to fix it. So the fact that we have this little bit of good news in terms of findings was really, really exciting. And when I started to think about it, it kind of resonates a little bit, right? Because you are spending more time with people that you love. And so again, we asked about social engagement. And so we said, you know, are you socializing more in these ways than you did before the pandemic started? And 47% of people are spending more time with loved ones now than they did before. 76% are reconnecting or catching up with people that they care about that they haven't talked about more than they did before the epidemic. And 83% are using social media more than they did before to keep in touch. So things like Zoom or Skype or other social media platforms. And so this resonates with me because I personally have been catching up with people from grad school. I recently had a phone conversation with my high school best friend who I haven't talked to in probably 10 years or 15 years, right? And I think people are using this time to try to reconnect and to enjoy more time with the people that do live in their households because I think they're feeling globally isolated from their communities, from their workplaces, et cetera. So I think it's sort of this interesting mixed bag where people are reaching out because they understand now more than ever how important connectedness is because they can't go anywhere and they're less busy. And then sort of on the more negative side of findings, one of the consequences of being embedded in social networks is that you care about other people. And so a lot of the stress in our lives, and this probably resonates with anyone who's a parent or a caregiver to a parent, to an elderly parent, is that we worry a lot about other people. And so one of the things, places that we have seen a marked negative increase is in the degree to which people are worried about others. So if you compare, for example, the first navy blue bar and the red bar on the left, about 58% of people in Indiana are worried that they themselves will become infected with COVID-19, but 85% are worried that a loved one will become infected. And then if you look at the right two bars, only 43% of Indiana residents are afraid that they themselves will become severely ill, become hospitalized, or might die from COVID-19, but 76% are worried that those same severe outcomes will happen to a loved one. So one of the things that we have to account for is this idea that we as humans have linked lives. So our emotional health is not just about how we ourselves are experiencing the world, but also about those we love. And we tend to take on the stress and the worry of others. And this is particularly true of women. And then the findings regarding sort of subjective feelings of loneliness, stress, anxiety, et cetera, are a little bit less positive than just the information about how much people are interacting. So about 29% of people in Indiana say that they lack companionship, right? So this is sort of a classic measure of loneliness. And about 48% feel isolated. And this is about 3 times as high as it was in T1. So even though people are experiencing more engagement with at least the people they live with and potentially reaching out to other people that they haven't talked to in a while more than ever before, they still subjectively feel more isolated and subjectively feel lonely. And we're seeing this play out in mental health effects. So about 15% of Indiana residents have what's called anhedonia, where you just don't want to do anything, you lack interest in things, more than half the days, which is a clinical level. Same with feeling anxious. About 20% feel anxious more than not, and about 30% feel stressed more than they don't feel stressed since the COVID-19 epidemic. And those are really high levels of stress and anxiety. And then finally, another thing that I'm really concerned about is stigma. So what happens to people who test positive for COVID-19 in terms of the way that others view them? So, we've seen probably in the media a lot of information about certain racial and ethnic groups being targeted with hate crimes. Businesses where there have been outbreaks are being, people are protesting against them. And so I'm worried about what happens when people test positive. And it seems that other people are worried about that as well. So 36% of Indiana residents said that if someone tested positive for COVID-19, they would feel like an outsider in their community. And 30% said that if someone tested positive, they would lose friends. So I'm really concerned about what the potential longer term effects are of actually testing positive for this. And then the flip side of that is, if people are afraid of what others will think about them if they test positive, right, which could be that they're, behaving irresponsibly, they're not social distancing like they should, they're not washing their hands as much as they should, then are they going to not be tested if they suspect that they have the disease? Are they not going to seek treatment because they're afraid of what the social repercussions are of testing positive? And this is something that we see with other stigmatized conditions like mental illness or substance abuse, that it reduces treatment seeking. So I'm a little bit worried from a public health standpoint about that. Okay, so I'm gonna stop sharing my screen now. And can you all see me now? Okay, great. And talk about what I think are some of the higher level sort of conclusions or takeaways from these quick preliminary findings. So what are the short and long-term health consequences of this likely to be, and how might this change our social and work life as we know it? So again, we find that people are supporting one another and finding time to catch up and spend time with people that they love more than ever before. And one potential consequence of this, which I think would be positive, is that it may change our social attitude about work-life balance, right? So we may start to realize that, all of those soccer matches and music lessons and everything else that we sign our kids up for and we sign ourselves up for, that all of those things are not equal to or not worth the time relative to actually spending quality time with people that we love. And likewise, I expect that it may change how some employers structure the workday. So I'm hoping that one thing that comes out of this, and my number one wish, is fewer meetings, right? Like maybe you all have experienced this. It's like, oh no, we really don't need 500 meetings a week. We can still get our work done without them. And maybe we can be a little bit more flexible in terms of when you start and stop working, or how much time you take off, or whether we move to a 4-day work week, et cetera. So I'm hoping that, as businesses realize that productivity hasn't been lost, that we might see some positive social changes. On the flip side, I'm a little bit worried about a decline in civic engagement as people withdraw from broader social obligations in favor of spending time with their sort of core network. So I'm a little bit worried that a lot of the volunteering and other things that people do might decline over time, as those are sort of like the easy kinds of activities that people can slough off in favor of spending more time with their primary family unit. I hope that's not true, but I do worry a little bit about it. And then sort of the caveat of all of this is that there are likely really large social disparities in these experiences. So people who are middle and upper class, who are working from home, who have resources, they are able to connect with other people, to spend more quality time playing games or puzzles or whatever. But blue collar or service industry workers who continue to go to their place of work, who put themselves at risk every day, who are especially stressed out about finances, they are probably not likely to reap the social benefits of having this extra time with their family. And so we need to think about sort of the broader consequences for social inequality of these findings. And then the last sort of takeaway point is that despite that many people are socializing more through these alternative modes of connecting, we still see really high levels of perceived isolation and loneliness and anxiety and stress. And I think that this is explained in part by other things. So financial stress, we know a lot of people have lost their jobs, but people are worried about their loved ones getting sick. There are really high levels of worry about parents, for example, and older people who may be more at risk. But also we're seeing social isolation from our weaker ties. So even though we're interacting more with our core network, we are not seeing, at least not face-to-face in the ways that we used to, our coworkers, our neighbors, other people that give us a broader sense of community. We are isolated largely from those people. And so that may be contributing to these perceived feelings of isolation. And then in terms of long-term consequences, I worry about higher rates of depression and anxiety and suicide, especially among groups that are really high risk, like older people who are going to isolate for longer, and adolescents, where this is a really important part of their social and cognitive development right now, and they're missing out on a lot of those important milestones. So I expect to see differences across groups. I worry about substance use. So in our survey, for example, we've seen that people who smoke are smoking 30% more, people that drink are drinking 25% more. I've had a cocktail or two to try to get through the, educating my kids at home. And then I also worry a lot about cognitive decline among older people who are socially isolated during this time, because we know that that's linked to Alzheimer's disease and dementia. And then finally, the very last overarching point is that above all else, this COVID-19 pandemic is going to exacerbate health disparities. So this is going to widen differences that already existed in socioeconomic and racial and ethnic group health outcomes. And so that's one thing. We've already seen this in terms of Detroit and the COVID-19 illness itself, but it also applies to all of the secondary economic, social, and mental health consequences of the pandemic. Those will all be worse for people who are disadvantaged or marginalized in society. Sorry to end on such a depressing note, but that's the end.
Thank you, Brea. That was really impressive to be able to unpack on the fly such current data about, what I think some of us are feeling and what we're thinking about the current situation. And just because I know you have to leave it too, I just want to bring up a couple comments that are in the chat here, and that's a great way to discuss and to put comments in there. But Michael Kaufman wonders how density might factor into some of this data, and suggesting is there a greater fear of transmission in more dense places, but at the same time better social connectivity. And so just thinking about it there, and if you have a thought to that.
Yeah, yes, we're really concerned about rural-urban differences, and one of the nice things about these data is that we have detailed geolocating. So, and we're in all the counties in Indiana, so we can compare sort of what the outcomes are at different levels of density. And I do expect there to be more social isolation in rural areas, and also more economic deprivation as a consequence of the pandemic. So yes, that's a great insight. We fully expect to see those things. I just didn't have time to look at those those findings this morning.
Yeah, and then just as a follow-up, a positive sort of comment that Michael and Starla Hart and even Liz Izzo were talking about is, like, is there a positive outside that maybe civic engagement can look different in a new world, and in a positive way, from virtual volunteering or helping in ways like that?
Yeah, I think so. And I think there is, even though I may be being a little pessimistic about civic engagement, I think it is possible that there'll be sort of a rally around the flag effect, like we saw after 9/11, where people will want to come together and help their communities. At the same time, we're seeing a lot of politically divisive rhetoric. And so that always makes me worry, because civic participation tends to go down when you see those kinds of sentiments at the national level. But for sure, I think that people are, by necessity going to become exposed to different kinds of engagement and different kinds of getting involved. So to the degree that companies can shift to virtual ways of volunteering, or maybe volunteering with your family unit, so that you can use that as an opportunity to spend time together doing something for your community, I think that, that might offset some of the tendency that we might see for people to kind of like regroup and turn more insular towards their primary family unit.
Yeah, thanks. I love the idea of sort of family volunteering. Well, thanks again, Brea. We're gonna head on to the next presentation. But again, thanks for putting such clear data together on the fly this morning. And so that's about as current as we can get. And so it's my pleasure now, all the way from Dorchester, Massachusetts. We flew him in just for this talk. Kenneth Bailey joined us. I'm really excited about this. As I said, our chance in this homeworks was for us to make new connections and to connect with people we admired from a distance and invite them into this program. And so I'm really happy to invite Kenneth into the program, who is one of the co-founders of the Design Studio for Social Intervention. And this is really important to us because this is Indy Design Week. We want to think about social connectivity and design and community, all kind of in a similar space. And so Kenneth is an urban designer who founded, as I mentioned, Design Studio for Social Intervention in 2005. He's devoted to the improvement of civil society and everyday life. This organization he creates operates at the intersection of design thinking and practice, social justice and activism, public art and social practice, and civic and popular engagement, designing and testing social interventions with and on behalf of marginalized populations, controversies, and ways of life. Bailey, who believes that public areas are places where individuals can relax and unwind or voice their approval with elected officials, he promotes the use of symbolic demonstrations to reclaim public space that has become inaccessible to those who need it. So, Kenny, I hope I didn't get your introduction too far off, but thanks so much for joining us today from Massachusetts.
Thank you. I need to share my screen.
Just as Kenny's getting that set up, I just say, it was I was really inspired at a paper that you and one of your coworkers wrote, and so it was a really interesting time to bring you into this. And so, thanks so much for taking the time to connect with us.
Absolutely, and I will talk a little bit about that paper as well. So, hello everyone. I'm trying to. Wait a minute, I think I need to do this one. View. Slide on it. Did that do it? No?
I think if you also click that play button right there, the little triangle, top middle.
Oh, thank you. Oh my God, you would think that I would have this stuff together by now, but every day I learn a new thing. So, hello everyone. Kenneth Bailey, actually sequestered in Venice Beach, Los Angeles right now. I was supposed to be on the East Coast, but once the COVID ball dropped, I wanted to be quarantined somewhere with more sun. So I fled from the East Coast to the West Coast so I could do the quarantine and eat oranges at the same time. And happy to be visiting Indiana. I grew up in St. Louis, so I feel a strong attachment to the Midwest. I'm one of the co-founders of the Design Studio for Social Intervention. We're about 14 years old, and we exist to help civil society groups and social change groups and people who care about civic life test, try, develop, prototype interesting, different, more culturally complicated, more relationally aware solutions to complex social problems. So Brea was speaking about loneliness, and that people are experiencing loneliness subjectively in their day-to-day lives in Indiana. One of the things we find in our work is that typically when people notice those kinds of social problems, they tend to try to solve them at an individual level, or think about the problem as a set of personal problems. So you have these set of people who are personally isolated. And one of the things we try to do is to help people who would try to address a problem like that understand that it's a social problem. And if you want to get at it, you have to understand the hard and soft arrangements out of which people's lives are connected or not connected, and make the change at the structural, the social, the symbolic level, versus trying to make things better for a series of individuals. And that's where for us design comes in, is once you find a problem like that, how you describe it matters. For us, we like to use the term that description embeds prescription. We got it from an author who was heavily influenced by Gregory Bateson, who also has influenced our sort of take on design, who wrote a book called Completing Distinctions. And so how you talk about things or how you actually describe things matter. And so we spend a lot of time trying to find fruitful descriptions that are relational in nature, and sort of veer from the individuation of social problems to descriptions that show us that we're embedded in relationship and enmeshed with each other. And out of those kinds of solutions, out of those kinds of descriptions, we try to develop and test and promote different solutions to social problems. So I will give you an example. So one of the projects we're known for is Public Kitchen. We started this project about 7-8 years ago, and in it we posed the question: if kitchens were public, like schools or libraries, how would that change social life? How would our lives be different if we had these places we could come and learn about food together, cook together, have better understandings of our local gastronomic traditions, or shared traditions, or traditions that have moved into our communities from different diasporas? What kind of context, what kind of things might we learn from this kind of a context? And one of the things we like to propose about this idea of a public kitchen is we think the idea of a public kitchen is different than a soup kitchen, which we often would get the pushback from, is how is it different than a place where people can go and get soup? And the first thing we'd say is a public kitchen is for everyone, where we typically think about soup kitchens as a place for people in need. For us, the public kitchen is a place for lots of different needs, and some of those needs might be loneliness. Some of those needs might be a person who is doing fairly well off, or fairly well off as economically, but can't cook rice. So we try to create these new ways for people to encounter each other, to make the case that a lot of the social problems that we find ourselves dealing with or are faced with actually are directly connected to the lack of opportunities, or the lack of social context that could exist, that don't exist, that could actually improve the quality of our lives. And so for us, we like to think about social design and designing these kinds of solutions as a way of improving social relationships and civil society, and showing that the way that we live our social lives is not a fait accompli. There's still lots of room for innovation. There's lots of room for development, and in terms of what kinds of social worlds we inhabit, and that we as communities can use design to continue to improve our social lives. We also wrote a book called Ideas, Arrangements, Effects. You can find it on our site if you go to ds4si.org. And that's where we make the claim that ideas are embedded in social arrangements that produce effects, or you could take it the other way around and say effects are a product of social arrangements, and those social arrangements are holding or give life to or vivify lots of different ideas. And so we would say in our language that this question of loneliness that Brea brought up is an effect of social arrangements. And if we want to have a different effect, then we have to go and understand and change and redesign at the scale of social arrangements. And one of the things we find that's gonna happen, or we're worried about happening coming out of COVID-19, is that we came into COVID-19 already in what we would call social fracture, and social fracture across a variety of different terrains, from a social fracture across who feels safe with the police right now in terms of state-sanctioned violence, social fracture across who feels okay with the people who are being held in the detention center, like conditions in terms of immigration. People who are struggling with right now sort of keeping our stores and our communities and our lives online, in terms of making sure we have food and making sure that we get our packages, versus those of us who are able to sequester in place and be safe. So we came into COVID-19 already sort of fractured. And one of the things we covered in the paper that Richard found that really got us in this conversation, social justice in a time of social distance, is the concern that coming out of this, we're gonna have a remainder, an affective remainder, that's going to make it even more difficult to deal with the fractures we already were suffering from. And in fact, this drawing into our communities and building more connection to our loved ones could potentially draw us even further away from communities that we see are dealing with situations that we might not necessarily have to deal with because they don't affect us directly, personally, in our daily lives. And so we're concerned that that part of the fracture that we're going to be dealing with post-COVID is more of a pulling away from each other, where we should be pulling towards each other. And so our question is, if we anticipate a kind of further pulling apart, how do we create the conditions and design for new techniques for knitting social fabric and building more empathy towards each other when the conditions of social and sort of physical distancing might make us more leery of each other. And so what we're hoping is that the opportunities that are being, that opportunities will come out of the increasing unemployment rates that are hitting people across multiple communities, the increasing amounts of time that we have where we're not sort of in normal life, that out of this time we're experiencing right now might come opportunities for us to start to think about and design projects that could actually knit social fabric versus sort of suffer from this, what we are worried about is a sort of pulling away from social fabric. Let me see if I can get out of this exit and go back to showing you guys my face. There we go. Screen sharing to stop, and there. So you can see me again?
Yes.
Yes. So now I think what we're really interested in is sort of designing a set of interventions where we would work with artists and activists and academics to actually promote turning towards each other and promoting new forms of public life that we can start to live now, where people start to see people who are experiencing things that are different from them now. And we actually use this opportunity to try to build more empathy so that upon being able to re-enter public space or public life, that we come back into public life feeling more connected to people who are experiencing different realities from us, who are living in different worlds from us. And we're hoping to try to create attractors that would be, that would give people who are interested in building empathy and building connection and building new forms of trust or new forms of getting to know the other in ways that are accessible, can be trusted, and will be fun. Because we can't try to make a more equitable knitted world together and it be literally about knitting a new world together. It's got to be about something that's more fun. And the platform we're thinking about right now, Elizabeth, is called an adventure board. We're thinking about designing adventures that people can go on with people that they don't know from different walks of life, from different parts of the world, that would make it possible for them to achieve things that will make the world better, make our environment better, make our ecologies better, but also hopefully, if we can get the design right, get people compensated for them. And so the larger context that we're trying to do these designs in, we're still working on, but our sort of design prototype we're working on is to have an arrow pointing saying back to the normal world, and then another arrow saying towards a new world together, or something along those lines. Like, that's where we're at in terms of our prototypes, and that will be the sort of call into trying to imagine a world where we're really interested in a lot of the writing that's been coming out that's sort of simpatico with the paper we put out that said this is a time not to go back to normal, it's a time to imagine a new reality. We're really excited about and interested in that sort of call, and really see ourselves as trying to put direct techniques and practices and concrete things in place that people can actually do, so that we don't have to say going towards a new world is just a lofty notion. We're trying to say that we can actually do it, that there are practices and techniques we can use to do it. And so we're about 3 weeks into this design work. Hopefully we will have some things to show for it at the end of May, going into early June, and would love to keep you all posted. And we know we have to have these opportunities be available for people to do, even in the midst of not being able to touch each other or see each other. And that's going to be a difficult sort of design constraint. But we feel like now is the chance or the opportunity to just start to say a new world can be, or new worlds really can be created, and to give people an opportunity to not just sort of stick to their own clan, stick to their own cohorts in ways that sort of make us more leery of each other and make us more vulnerable to the kinds of social conditions that we see in terms of social inequality. But to say that now we can actually move towards each other in ways that can model real social change. So with that, I'm going to stop and see if you have any questions, Richard, or if we should move on.
Well, thank you. It's so inspiring to hear from you, and to hear, you come exactly after Brea. Is this idea is that what we had hoped is to have you two sort of frame out some bigger policy level issues or research-based issues. And I think you both did that so brilliantly, to think about what are some of the big topics. And I think everyone I've been noticing the comments was really inspired and loved your idea of moving together to a new space, and trying to co-create that reality. And so I'm just going to pause for just a minute to see if there's any clarifying questions, but then if there aren't any, I'm going to move into the next section of this program, which is to hear from some community practitioners sort of on the street. And I think they're going to have a great response to what they just heard. But any clarifying questions? It is so much harder to read the room. I can't, and you can't even look out into the room and see if there's a friend you can call on, or well, certainly there's going to be some time for interaction at the end. But again, folks, if you join me in thanking Kenneth, Kenny for speaking. We'll hear from you in a bit. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, great. So the next part of this program is an idea to say, well, we have these sort of two sort of longer thoughts. Is now we're going to transition into this idea to hear three practitioners that are based here in Indiana, to hear sort of how they are in a boots on the ground way dealing with this challenge and how it affects their sense of social connectivity. And so I'm really excited about this part of the program. It's a way for us to connect with some old friends again and some new friends. And so to start us off, we're going to hear from Rachel Glago, who is an interdisciplinary artist, photographer, administrator, and organizer with a background in performance art. Her projects are often community-based and include social practice principles. She currently works as project coordinator at Secretly Group, a major record label based in Bloomington, Indiana. And she is also the executive director at Midway Music Speaks, which she's going to tell us about. And she's a mayoral appointee on the Bloomington Arts Commission. So with that, I'd like to welcome Rachel.
Hey, Richard, thanks for having me, and hello, everyone. If for some reason you cannot hear me or you have a question, just add it to the chat box. I'm going to share my screen. Actually, I'll share my screen in a minute. I'm going to not share it yet. First, Midway Music Speaks. Our mission is to celebrate and connect women identifying and non-binary people in music through promotion, empowerment, and performance opportunities. And as an organization that tends to present events, COVID has definitely taken a hit for us. Our biggest event of the year is a festival called Midway Music Festival, which happens typically in the fall. So we'll get into kind of how we're looking at that, as no one really knows what's going to happen this fall. But that's our largest event. And then we also program a teen band competition called Rising Star, which happens in April. That had to be canceled this year. But we're looking at, ways to still engage that community during these times. And then also we host a girls rock camp. So I know that Indy has Girls Rock Indianapolis. If you live closer to Louisville, there's Girls Rock Louisville. And we host Girls Rock Bloomington. So that's a summer camp for youth ages 8 to 13, and usually girls, trans, and non-binary youth. So that camp is usually June 8th through 13th, and it's in person. It's breaking out kids into bands, having them write a song, and then perform it in a showcase at the end of the week for the community. And of course, that entire event has had to be restructured. So I guess a little more context kind of on how we started and how we look at the music industry in general. Now I will share my screen. Is this graphic here. Can everyone see that? Cool. So this is kind of like how we started. As you can see, there's a huge discrepancy in representation in music, and that's kind of where our mission comes from and all of our activities and programming. And I think to an extent, this is kind of been put under a microscope even more now that we are entering the post-COVID era. And it's not just about gender, of course. It's becoming very clear that there are other examples of social biases and discrimination that have kind of become very real in the music industry. Just speaking specifically on gender here, you can see that the blue lines are representations of acts with men only in lineups. The yellow lines are mixed gendered groups, and the pink lines are women only groups. This is from a study in 2016 that was posted at Huffington Post, and this is the data that they collected. So this is kind of what stemmed our organization, and it's been a huge issue across the industry for a while. So here's an Instagram account I'm about to show you called Book More Women. Here's an example of one of their posts. It's a lineup with all of the acts with men only taken out. And as you can see, this is with all the men in it. So it's a much more full lineup. I believe it's 26% of booking this year had women in the acts. There's another group called Lineups Without Men. It's very similar. This one was 22%, and you can see it with everyone. So this is kind of just where we come from as an organization, and why for us, as we're seeing all of these social issues come to light in a more obvious way with COVID, it's important that we continue to support these minorities as well as everyone that is facing hardship right now. So to begin, as I think most people know, with artists specifically, and with the music industry, is a lot of musicians are working on a gig economy, or in a gig economy, I should say. So we're looking at a lot of concerts are canceled and shows are canceled. And not only are presenting organizations like Midway facing this issue of how do we continue to present, and as a nonprofit, how do we continue to fundraise so that we can continue to pay artists, but artists themselves are losing gigs and losing their revenue for the next couple months. And it's not just about artists that have booked gigs and those gigs have been canceled. It's also about artists that now cannot book gigs for the future. And if they are booking gigs for the future, it's like 6-7 months from now, they're not booking anything for the next month or two because no venue is open. So with that said, we actually launched something called, a couple days after COVID was announced, we launched the Indiana Music Industry Relief Fund. working as a fund to collect donations in order to fund $250 to artists that were experiencing fallout from COVID, and specifically artists that identify as women, including trans women, and non-binary people. So for us, it was about how can we continue to support this community in a time where they aren't getting a lot of support in general, and there has been issues around supporting them anyways before COVID. So now that it's become kind of this new world, how do we address that? So we have collected applications and we've collected funds, and then we're trying to redistribute those funds to our community. We have thus far supported excuse me, 4 or 5 artists, can't remember exactly how many, but with $250 each, so that they have some sort of additional revenue. And it's not much, but it's a little bit, and it's a really simple application process. So artists that aren't familiar with filling out grants and such are able to easily apply. So that's one way that we've tried to connect with our community and make sure our community still feels supported throughout this time. Now, as we start looking at some of the events I mentioned earlier that Midway does, first off, Girls Rock Bloomington, of course, as I said, summer camp, it's kids, they're all working together. We have actually shifted to presenting a series of workshops online, similar to how this is being set up via Zoom. We'll be doing the same thing. Those will all be free, open to the public workshops that will happen weekly throughout the month of June. So there'll be a songwriting workshop, and there'll be a workshop on gear. Hopefully we can still figure that out here. The beauty of Girls Rock in person is that no instruments are required by the participants, because campers get instruments from us for free to participate. So that's of course like an issue that's now kind of presenting itself, is how do we become as inclusive as possible? Who has access to the internet? Who doesn't have access to the internet? Who has access to instruments and things like that would benefit them throughout these sessions? And so that's something that we're navigating. And how do we create a workshop that can be inclusive? And how do we get it to folks that aren't able to tune in live and all of that? So that's one way we're trying to address this connectivity through the Girls Rock Camp. For the festival, which is currently slated for the first weekend in October, and this is going into our 4th year of the festival, we're looking at how do you announce something like a live event in the time of COVID? And will we even be able to do an in-person event come October? So we're kind of building out 2 festivals right now. We're building out the in-person festival that includes different levels of social distancing, but we're also building out this digital festival. And with digital festivals and digital music, there requires a whole nother level of publishing and rights clearances and licensing that you have to go through. So there are some real challenges that stem from that. And of course, with artists doing their own live streams, there's some interesting data that's come out in the past week about how people are adapting to this live stream experience, and how do you monetize that? For a nonprofit, it's still important for us to profit in some way in order to pay our artists and make sure that the festival can happen another year, to make sure that we can host these camps. So there's a bunch of different services that offer, and now for the first time have switched to offering online ticketing for live streaming. So we're looking into those possible ways of presenting. And then a few other just interesting statistics that came into my inbox this morning from a music e-newsletter called Water and Music, if anyone's interested in it. It's great. And in this newsletter, they were talking about this forced shift with live streaming, and how there's been this shift from when artists are touring, it's low volume but high margins in terms of their model for being able to create physical scarcity. You know, they go to one city and they don't have to go to multiple cities, and so they can create that. But now with live streaming, there's this high volume but low margin model with digital ubiquity and everybody having that. So their artists are now being required to make more content for less money. So our biggest thing with the festival this year is that all of our artists get to keep their deposits, get to and will be paid in full, whether or not it's digital or online. So looking at how do we still protect our community as everyone's feeling, excuse me, as everyone's feeling this divide, if you will. And then the last thing that came in that I found super interesting is that as we're looking at these live streams and who's hosting those, the other issue is how are people discovering music, and how are people discovering these artists, and what artists are being recommended, and how are biases still being put into those algorithms, how are biases still happening when it comes to gender or ethnicity or race or anything like that when it comes to the artists that are being recommended and that are available for live stream shows. And it is interesting to note that fans are engaging now with more so than before COVID, with apps such as Bands in Town, Dice, Songkick, and Eventbrite that are hosting these live streaming activities. So Bands in Town, their normal click-through rates were usually between 10 and 20% for in-person shows, and now they're saying it's closer to 80% for live streams, which is huge. And so that's good that live streams are working, but of course that means they're working to an extent. It's kind of who is it working for? I think artists, they're producing more content for less money, and so and to an audience, yes, they have the opportunity of finding a new audience, but it's also this interesting way of how do you connect to this audience that wasn't your fans before? How do you connect with those fans now? And then how do you look at kind of the broader community and how are artists supporting each other? Yeah, so those are kind of the big things that we're looking at. And then looks like there was a question in here. I'm going to answer that one from Elizabeth. Okay, so the question was, besides registration fees for workshops, how else do you fundraise and source revenue? I heard grants. Is there anything else? And that's a great question. It's of course a question that a lot of nonprofits are facing right now. Grants is huge, especially grants that are COVID specific that we're eligible for. We do a lineup announcement every June, and so our lineup announcement is a video announcement tied in with interviews with artists that are performing on our lineup in fall. So some of that is through like DJ dance party live streams where through Twitch, you can tip the artists. Some artists have been doing specific fundraisers for us and then donating the money after their Twitch performance. We've started doing something on Facebook called Quarantine Streams, where we're working with artists that we've worked with in the past, as well as new artists that we've heard of or have reached out to us to perform live streams as well through Facebook. And again, tips, that's how we're doing those ones. We also have been hosting a bi-weekly trivia night. So doing online trivia, so you can play trivia with the people that you're quarantining with or isolating with, and or not, and just call them up or whatever to have a team, and having requested donations for participation in the trivia. And the trivia has been based on women and non-binary people in music is kind of the theme for the most part. So that's kind of how we've been trying to source additional revenue, and then merchandise. And we've, if anyone's familiar with bonfire.com, it's a really great way to create merch without having to hold inventory on your own. So we've been able to create merch to sell through their platform. They take care of the printing, shipping, everything, and we don't have to have any inventory on hand. And instead of paying the upfront fee to have that inventory, it's more or less we just receive the profits back. So there's no upfront costs, which is huge. And that's a big thing, I think, for us and for other organizations is really reviewing the costs that you are now incurring due to COVID, but also the costs that you can cut back on.
Yeah, certainly the funding landscape is only going to get more complex, but I really appreciated your point to saying is that, live streams are working, but who are they working for? And I think that's a question that I think we could feel in this room today, you know, who has the opportunity to tune into this. So I'm just going to keep moving, Rachel, and we'll get back to it. But thanks so much for your presentation. If folks will join me in thanking you. There is a reaction button on your Zoom where you can clap. And so look, I'm clapping, Rachel. You can see my thing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. We're just going to turn quickly now into the next presenter. I'm really excited to have Heather Carson here from Columbus. Heather is a Washington State native who spent the last 20 years committed to the well-being of young people. She's joined the Council for Youth Development in Columbus in 2017 to assist in designing the community's first youth master plan. She has a master's in education and integrated curriculum from the University of Washington and an MPA specializing in nonprofit management from Indiana University, Bloomington. She has called Columbus, Indiana home for about 7 years, enjoys kayaking and travel, and also has 2 active kids. Hi, Heather. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, Richard. Hi, everybody. And I'll have to say that I was slightly distracted. I've been taking so many notes from what Brea has said and Kenneth and Rachel, and I'm sure all of us are finding all of this to be extremely helpful as we're kind of navigating this whole new world for all of us. So I'm going to try and share my screen. Let's see if this works. And I'll share a little bit about Council for Youth Development and how we fit in the conversation today. So let me know, can you see, let's see here. How about there? Can you see that?
Looks great.
Okay, perfect. So a little bit different, I'll just share. Council for Youth Development is a coalition in Bartholomew County and Columbus, Indiana. And we are really looking at this broader, kind of like what Kenneth was talking about, system level change for our community and our kids. And where we started is actually with the stakeholder engagement process. We have roughly 20,000 young people under the age of 18 that we are committed to. And so this coalition, being very diverse, over 150 different members, but essentially about 50 working partners that serve and support young people. Obviously lots of different advocacy work, lots of different focuses, and sometimes even conflicting or competing work as we're going forward. And so what we thought we needed to do, and this is just a little bit of background, is we needed to have really a common challenge question that we could all work on together at a system level. And so back in 2017, we really anchored this question that we have committed to as a community since then, and I'm really proud of, and I think it's really held up over time. And that question is, how can we work together to ensure that every child is healthy, safe, educated, engaged, and supported in our county? So prior to the outbreak, we have had this very, very committed, rich level of commitment to social and emotional well-being. And how we've done that is through some different strategies throughout the years. A couple of our key things is we have really identified kind of 3 areas that we want to work on. That is youth, parent and caregivers, and those professionals and serve and support youth. So when we talk about Council for Youth Development, the projects that we have and we will continue even now, we have a Youth Empowerment Summit that happens in the fall in September. We have youth ambassadors that I'll kind of explain. We also have a Shine On postcard campaign that we do every year with the International Youth Day, which is August 12th, as part of United Nations initiative. So that is actually where we have young people, young artists from our community create 4 different postcards, and we print 8,000 postcards that are given out for free across our county. And the only request that we have is that there is an inspirational or encouraging note that goes out to a young person on that postcard. It can be handed to another young person or it can be mailed, but it's just one of those engagement things when we talk about social connectivity we've been doing over the last couple of years that's been successful. And in addition to that, we really want to equip our young people themselves with empowering them to make a difference. And so we have youth empowerment workshops that we piloted last year with really young students that we have, high school students that are overlooked in their leadership capabilities, but definitely have it within them. And so That's a picture right there with our mayor and a group of our Latino students that came and did the pilot. And now we're going to move out to other groups, students of color, including our African-American community of students that we have, as well as our LGBTQ community as well. So some of these workshops have already kind of been in place as well. So not only do we have these projects and initiatives for our youth in our county, but we also have really committed to parents and caregivers, whether that is a grandparent or a legal guardian or a foster parent, and equipping them with some skills and ideas and resources so that they can be the best that they possibly can be for those young people in their homes. And so that's kind of another piece that we do as well. And finally, the other aspect of our coalition is that we really focus in on professional development for child and youth care workers. And so for us, we've really committed to social emotional well-being, like I mentioned before, and have looked at Search Institute's framework, which is called developmental assets. It's essentially asset building. How do we encourage every young person to thrive? So these are kind of the bigger picture of the Council for Youth Development and some of the organizations that we've aligned ourselves with. But here's what happened. Exactly 2 months ago, we had our last gathering, and it was something we were very excited about. The Search Institute, like I said, is a national organization, and they decided to do a regional training in our community here in Columbus. We were very excited. We had Peace Corps leaders from Guatemala flew in. We had youth leadership and youth workers come in from Sweden. We had out-of-state workers as well coming in, and educators. And it was just this really collaborative, focused on a deep understanding of how do we increase developmental relationships in our communities. And you can see we're side by side. There's no masks. This was the last of the last. And once that hit, with the outbreak, we were very fortunate to be able to have everybody gather and disperse back to where their homes were, they were safely. But what happened was that was an immediate priorities that kind of shifted in Bartholomew County. And I found this quote, and I really believe in it, and I think it fits with our coalition in general, is that this whole concept of resiliency, because we hope for this in our young people and we hope for this in the organizations that we partner with, but I really feel we are being tested right now, and I'm sure you feel the same way. So I just think this is a great quote that says, resilience is the capacity of a system, enterprise, or person to maintain its core purpose and integrity in the face of dramatically changed circumstances. And I cannot tell you enough how different it became quite quickly for our coalition. So I thought I would share the three main things that when we talk about boots on the ground in one county, this is what happened. Essentially, a week after this great training that we had, Council for Youth Development was called to serve on a task force, and the task force really came out of our county, our regional hospital, and our city officials that said we have to do something. And so we served on this task force right from the get-go. It's called the Bartholomew County Emergency Child Care Task Force, and I'm pretty sure that we have some links for you if you're interested in what happened. But partially what happened was we shifted some of our work, stayed with our core mission, and built protocols and opportunities for essential workers and healthcare workers to have childcare during the time. We set up an emergency childcare center. We've kept that going. We're in discussions today about how to roll out kind of these new phases for Indiana and for our community so that children there's a place for them to go that's safe and healthy and inspiring and innovative, even during these challenging times. So something that the coalition hadn't originally anticipated but became flexible. We accepted the responsibility of changing our website. Those of you that design and know that there was a bit of a heavy lift to make sure we had content, resources all in one place. We had volunteer designers from our community that created graphics for us. It was just exciting and powerful to see all of the relationships that had been built over time and the trust that was already there for the system really to be activated for something very, very important. So our role as a coalition then was to help with reaching out to childcare providers who we didn't really have a great communication network with them across the county. And so we were able to do that and be helpful as well. So as the task force was going on, we also were doing all of our other great work. We did cut down, I think Brea had mentioned about fewer meetings. And so we did commit because so many of our partners are working on their own issues and their own sustainability. We cut down on some of our coalition work groups and work group meetings, but most of it, it's a coalition of the willing. So we found that some people were really ready to dig in as well. The second piece that we did, you see on here, is the Youth Development Index. And we realized for our coalition that, like I said before, there are many leaders, whether it's domestic violence services or mental health providers, or our Boys and Girls Club, or Big Brothers, Big Sisters. We know right now that data is critical. And so we put together we have a youth development index that does a benchmark data of our youth in the community and how are we doing. And it's based on 5 kind of indicators around different things. So I believe there's gonna be a link if you want to look at how this fits in, but it really provides the data so that as our community partners are looking for funding in this new world, that they have the data from our county, very local data to help them. And part of that is that we actually have youth voice. So we make sure that there is feedback survey information. For us, we use the Search Institute's survey so that it ties into the work we're doing with social emotional well-being that is in there as well. And the last piece that I'll just share that's on here is that we are really committed to youth participation, youth voice. We know and are absolutely concerned about how kids are doing right now. I thought Brea's point about isolation and our concerns, we just felt for us, the more adaptive we could be and the more flexible we could be. It's really about opportunity more than anything else. So our youth ambassador program has continued, and who you see on there is back behind me with plenty of social distancing. It's just hard to tell on here. Is our youth ambassador coordinator. And we have 20 ambassadors from all across the county. And literally it took us hours to get out to all their houses, but we felt there still needed to be this connectivity and celebration with these kids as they were announced last week. So not only are they, did they receive something on their doorstep with a balloon and a special treat that they had shared with what they liked, but also a congratulation personal note from us. And we, before the youth ambassadors had just kind of started up, and we were hoping not to bother them too much by every couple of weeks, we planned to get together face to face. But our commitment, and this is again, just adaptability, we realized we need to meet with them virtually every week. And even if it's just a touch base. So last week, Sarah, that's the coordinator, met with the kids for the first time. And it was just a simple conversation about how they're doing, but also what they're worried about. And it echoed actually the research. They're worried about their friends, and they're worried about their families, and they're worried about, you know, who has food. So part of what we're going to do with the youth ambassadors, while they do focus on the summit for the fall, we're also going to be working on how can they really activate their power to help the community as well. So the youth ambassadors is only kind of one piece, but I really wanted to highlight it because of really their role that they're going to be playing in sharing how do we find solutions with engagement? How do we find solutions with new ways for internships and workforce and volunteering for young people? And we really see them as right at the table with us, along with our other community partners. So what we're most concerned about, I think it actually kind of echoes what Rachel had brought up, and that is, as we're looking forward to the fall, the Youth Empowerment Summit has really been something for our whole county. So we invite different schools to be participating, and we've adjusted already to doing some type of, we're considering an online digital viewing of a documentary. We've done that usually in person with a panel. So I would love advice or thoughts on how do we kind of rethink engagement. So our mission stays the same. objectives have stayed the same. We are embracing technology. We're embracing different ways to do that. And we're really looking to the experts, the young people themselves. How do they want to be sharing and building community together? But we still have some work that we're going to be navigating for the fall. So I would say because of the design, with our stakeholder engagement process, because we have this really high level commitment, we know who we are as a coalition, we know what we want to do. Right now, it's just trying to figure out new strategies to continue the good work that we're doing in different ways, and really lifting up the kids themselves to be a part of this, because we know that they're critical and essential as we kind of go forward. So Richard, that's I'm keeping it kind of brief because I want to make sure we have plenty of time, and happy to turn it over to Joanna so that she has time as well.
No, thanks. That was really great, Heather. And I always like how you do such a great job to put kids first and to bring youth into the conversation. And I know we've had the good opportunity to work with you through our program Exhibit Columbus to engage youth. And so it's such an important part of, you know, the future. And so thank you for those thoughtful comments. And I'm just going to you know, again, I'll try my clap just so everyone can thank you for your talk. And then I'm just going to jump right into Joanna Nixon, who is going to be our third practitioner presentation, and then we're going to move into some discussion. But I'm really excited to have Joanna here today. Joanna actually helped me think about this idea when we first started thinking about it. And so Joanna is a friend of mine and someone who I lean on for ideas a lot. So, but Joanna, if you don't know, is the owner of Nixon Consulting, an Indianapolis nonprofit strategy firm. In this consulting capacity, Joanna is a lead project manager for the revitalization efforts along a 1.5 mile stretch of East 10th Street in Indianapolis, Indiana. Project goals for this corridor include repurposing vacant spaces for a creative reuse, the creation of a vibrant community spaces, organizing community-based arts and cultural programming, and facilitating the reuse planning process for a vacant historic theater. Prior to opening her consulting firm, Joanna worked for 10 years at the Central Indiana Community Foundation, and she is also a social worker by degree, currently serves on the boards of Keep Indianapolis Beautiful and Newfields. She's been on a lot of art and design boards. So I hope you'll help me in welcoming Joanna. Hi, Joanna.
Hi, Richard. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. I am so excited to be with all of you here today. Again, Joanna Nixon, I am the 10 East Art Director here in Indianapolis. Wanted to give you a little bit of background context as to my role as a place-based practitioner here in Indianapolis. So the neighborhood where I'm working was designated a federal promise zone by the Obama administration back in 2015. It's one of 14 urban promise zones in the entire country. So the Indianapolis Promise Zone is comprised of about 22 neighborhoods on the Near East side of Indianapolis, and it is a decade-long initiative focused on addressing some of our city's most complex macro and social issues, such as improving employment, safety, housing, educational attainment, and quality of life. So there's a lot of residents in the area that I'm working who are struggling even during the best of times. The average household income is about $30,000. The neighborhood is 40% people of color, and about 25% of the residents are under 18. So my specific consulting work is just a small part of a larger ecosystem in this neighborhood focused on kind of quality of life. My core focus is really kind of the intersection of arts, culture, design, and community development. So since mid-March, we've actually had to pivot a lot of our quality of life strategies and adapt our plans. But you know, what's been really exciting about that is that a lot of new collaborations, a lot of really creative approaches have emerged that would not have likely happened otherwise. So what motivates me about kind of our current reality is that we have been implementing some new outside of the box and creative ways to addressing quality of life, especially for incredibly vulnerable residents. And it's just something that we need to do now more than ever. So I wanted to share with you a few examples of some of kind of these outside of the box ideas that we have been working on the Near East side, just from a kind of a practical point of view. So I'm going to share my screen here. So here is just, if you guys are interested in checking out more specifically what we're doing, I wanted to share with you kind of our Facebook page, which is Inspire 10th Street. On the web, you can find us at 10eastarts.org. And so just wanted to talk briefly about what we're doing specifically around creating creative connections in times of social distancing. I'm trying to advance here. Hold on. So this is a quote that I've been using a lot as my mantra. And it's a quote that I have got from the Stanford Social Innovation Review, which is, you know, one of many publications that I'm looking at right now that's kind of helping to guide and inform a lot of the work that we're doing. But I think, you know, what I'm really focused on and a lot of my thinking is just really thinking about radical ways that we need to be thinking about new norms, what our world is going to look like on the other side of this, and how we need to be thinking right now about creativity, our own relevance, collaboration, and I think as some of the other presenters mentioned, resilience. So here's one example of something that we did very early on when the stay-at-home orders were issued in the state of Indiana. A lot of the students or the young people and families that live in our neighborhood don't have access to the internet. So when a lot of my friends in my social networks were on Netflix and they were on YouTube and they were able to go online and, you know, purchase things and activity kits for their children to do, a lot of the families and students in our neighborhood just didn't have that access. So very quickly, I reached out to a lot of my friends who are artists and who are graphic designers and illustrators and asked them if they would be willing to create coloring pages for art kits that were put together. And then I reached out to a local nonprofit organization on the Near East side called Teachers Treasures. They provide school supplies for students or for actually teachers in schools that are under-resourced. And collectively, this amazing partnership came about. And since mid-March, we've created 100 art kits that have gone to families who are in need. And on a weekly basis, they're going out with food boxes that are distributed at our local community center. The next thing that I'm really focused on is something that we did last year, which is during the summertime where we had free Friday arts pop-ups for families, in which we had all ages live music, art making, experimental programming. Every week we would have about 50 to 100 people show up at a vacant lot on the Near East side. This is something that I'm already rethinking for this year, just given the fact that most of the population on the Near East side is at risk and vulnerable. I just want to not create a situation where we're bringing large groups together. So I've kind of retooled the concept for our kind of our arts programming in this vacant lot on the Near East side. And this is a concept that I'm actually toying around with right now. I'm actually calling it a social distance parklet. So as you can see from this very kind of rough graphic, I've did a kind of overhead Google shot of the lot, and am currently having active conversations right now with woodworkers and fabricators to develop kind of these 2 to 4 person covered seating pods that I would be placing in these lots. I'm also having conversations with somebody who can bring me a micro shipping crate that we can put into the shipping crate a hotspot, so that we could have our neighbors still come together into this lot, but be socially distanced. We could do programming, but it allows us to be able to essentially take a lot where we would have had a lot of community kind of social cohesion, still allow for neighbors to connect, but kind of a really unique and safe way. So that's something that currently is in progress for the summer. Another program that we have implemented right away is what I'm calling the 10 East Window Art Gallery Project, where we have commissioned site-specific works by artists here in Indianapolis to essentially do a takeover of a lot of our vacant windows and empty storefronts right now. We've got about 15 different projects currently up along the East 10th Street corridor. And on the screen, I just wanted to spotlight 3 of those for you so you can see kind of the diversity of kind of what we're offering. So on the left, we've got a piece by an Indianapolis artist. Her name is Beatrix Vasquez. This project this art program allowed her to do a site-specific work, doing a new kind of an experimental medium for her. She's always worked in paper, but has never really kind of taken it to the next level of sculpture. So this opportunity allowed her to kind of do a new installation in a way that she's never done before. The next piece is a piece by an artist by the name of Chris Voorhees. Chris essentially is taking this building in the middle, and we've converted it to what I'm referring to as the 10 East Drive. He's doing nighttime video installation. It's essentially drive-in movie meets video art. It's a production that's about 23 minutes long. You can stay in your car or you can get out and watch it from a safe distance. But he's also done, as part of this piece, created an 87.9 FM sound component to it. So essentially you could stay in your car, tune into an FM radio station and listen to the sound that goes with this specific piece that he's created. This is something that has received such a huge response, this kind of throwback to the drive-through or drive-in days, and we're going to actually be programming this all summer long. And then the piece on the right-hand side is by an artist in a window storefront by the name of Jamie Paulus. And Jamie Paulus, I think, is eloquently summing up kind of what a lot of us are thinking right now. This piece is beautiful at night, but also during the day. So that's one way we've kind of activated some of our vacant storefronts. Another project that we focused on is partnering with one of our partners, Cathead Press. Cathead is a nonprofit printmaking shop on East 10th Street, and they, like I think Rachel was mentioning, have been really kind of jumping in and helping support some of the release efforts. So they have been designing and printing apparel and totes for a lot of our restaurants and local businesses right now that are really trying to raise money as part of their employee efforts. So this is a great example of how kind of graphic designers and illustrators are kind of being part of kind of the kind of creative solutions right now. And then finally, one of the things that is going to be launched this summer, actually starting in the next few weeks, is what I'm referring to. I need to come up with a more glamorous name to this. It's a senior courtyard concerts. So Rachel talked a lot about how the fact that a lot of our local musicians have lost a lot of gigs. And Brea talked a lot about, you know, this sobering data around social isolation. And so this kind of is a marriage of those two concepts. So the senior courtyard concerts is where we are going to be offering weekly courtyard concerts at 6 low-income senior housing units on the Near East Side. So the weekly concerts are going to be 2 45-minute sets, and we're going to have a rotating collective of musicians who are going to come and perform for our senior population. So this is just one way that our musicians can do what musicians love to do, and at the same time, spark some joy to a very kind of isolated and also incredibly high risk group right now. So those are just a few examples that we're working on. So just kind of, want to give my macro level thoughts on kind of where I think we're going and what we're thinking about. We have a really long road ahead of us, I think. There's just so many uncertainties right now with COVID. Given that my work is this intersection of art, design, culture, community development, I'm really looking at some, thinking about, what is it that our community is going to need from us on the other side of this. I'm thinking a lot about how do we think strategically about this interdisciplinary and cross-section collaboration, how do we amplify some of our creative assets that already exist in our neighborhoods and community? And then how do artists, creatives, designers, architects use their creative superpowers to be problem solvers and create positive community change? So, for me, what that means in kind of a neighborhood that is really under-resourced and struggling, I'm looking at public health. So how do we use creative approaches that allow us to safely interact with each other in indoor and outdoor spaces? I'm thinking a lot about mental health, as Brea mentioned. So how do we use the arts and creativity to reduce trauma, to bring joy, to heal, and to reduce isolation? I'm thinking a lot about food systems and access. So I've been reading a lot about the victory gardens that were in World War I and World War II. How can our architects and designers really help address food systems in a lot of our vulnerable communities? And the big one that keeps me up at night is around jobs and employment. Given that my heart is around kind of our creative sector, I've been looking a lot at kind of the WPA programs that existed with the lens of, kind of creative professionals. There's a program that I'm incredibly intrigued by that was created in 1935, and it was called the Milwaukee Handicraft Project. And it was an initiative in Milwaukee that really focused on how to employ artists and architects and designers and makers and fabricators. And, I'm really looking at stretching that here and flipping it on its head into a modern context. And I'm thinking a lot about kind of creative urban manufacturing strategies, particularly on the East Side. So with that kind of in closing, I, fundamentally believe that our creative communities, the whole suite of them, artists, designers, makers, architects have an essential role, have an essential role to play in our communities right now, coming up with creative solutions, helping us adapt to a new reality. And our creatives are inherent problem solvers, and I think this is our moment. So thank you.
Wow, thanks, Joanna. Also, my meager clap is to thank you for such a great presentation. I think you've framed out so many of the questions that I think that we were trying to get to today here at the end, and it's so. I really thank everyone for presenting and such interesting and creative ideas. I wonder, I'd like to open this up to some questions, but I'd first like to ask the four presenters that are here, do you have questions for each other? And so I think one of the things that's interesting is that we have you here together from around the country, and just to say is that a part of what I wanted to do to create this was to create a space for you all to be together. And I think back to, Kenny's idea that, or his statement that ideas are embedded in social arrangements. And so we have this opportunity to change social arrangements and therefore to change ideas. And I think that what you all have done have shown how you're exploring that. And so, I don't know, I turn it back to you all to say, is there a conversation amongst you four that, or a question that you have?
So this is Heather. Richard, can you hear me? I'm just, okay, great. So I just have to first say, I am so inspired. Not coming from an art background, art community in general, just so many wonderful ideas. So Kenneth, I don't know if you can hear me. There was so much that was said today. Was there anything that resonated with you that you would say, keep going, or that you would like us to explore in Indiana? I hate to put you on the spot, but there's just so many ideas that I even wrote down that I can consider for the young people in Bartholomew County, but just your thoughts in general.
Can everybody hear me?
Yeah, now.
In terms of inspiration or ideas, I think what you're doing in terms of weaving young people together across lines of difference is great. The extent to which you can amplify that and keep going with that, I think, is amazing. And the extent to which young people can begin to start to look at some of the other problems that they may be seeing. Like if young people could look at the problem of loneliness for Indiana, that would be interesting. Sort of using young people as your design research cohort to see if young people might come up with different solutions to address the loneliness epidemic in the state. And if, we really like sort of having young people think spatially and treating them like urbanists. So, or treating them like really human geographers, really, and letting them do the work of solution development, I think would be fun. So that's my go forward.
Love it.
Yeah, I love the ideas that it's fun. And it's interesting, Heather, when I was putting this together, I thought, oh, what would it be like if Heather actually had one of her youth ambassadors present her work? And but I think that is the idea that you put forward so much, and other people that are involved with youth is really putting them forward in these conversations as leaders. And so any other thoughts before we turn to a more public discussion or open discussion? So we're gonna try something a little. We're gonna try to change the social arrangements, Kenneth. So we're working with Poppy at Indy Design Week, and she has a way with Zoom to break us into groups. And so with the click of a button, she's gonna break us into, I think like 5 or 10 groups. And I'm gonna put in the chat some things that I'd like for you guys to talk about in your small groups. I know it's a little bit corny, but please go with it. We're trying, this is a session about social connectivity. And so we're gonna try something different with social connectivity. And so I thought I posted in there. So let me just post these questions I'd like you to do real fast, is quickly in your group, your name and what your affiliation is. Sort of who are you, very quickly. And then maybe talk a little bit either about how your social connections have been affected, or who you think is at greatest risk and why. And so sort of who you are and social connections and risk. Does that make sense? Okay, so we're all, I think Poppy's gonna press a button and we're gonna go into different rooms.
Yeah, and if you can assign a scribe to go to the Miro and capture your thoughts, that'd be great. You can also do that yourself.
Are we ready to be transported?
Yes, and here we go.
So you have to click join breakout room. It won't be that bad, I promise. Hey, folks. Well, I made it back. It seems like, I don't know, Kenneth, I don't mean to make light of your statement that we really didn't change social arrangements. There was a lot of similarity, I suppose, in the folks that were here, but just the idea to play with social connectivity a little bit as a chance to get to know people and to talk in an interesting way.
I didn't feel it was making light of it.
Okay.
You were using it. I love it.
Good. So, well, it all depends on someone's connection and how long it takes them to go that way or this way. Just because I see a friend there. Hey, Randy, did you go to an interesting place? You're already in front of the Miller House and Garden. You're on mute.
I snuck in. I'm sitting over at Miller's right now.
That's nice. It's a great Zoom background, yeah.
You don't have the keys, Randy?
No, you just sneak through the bushes.
Yeah.
Actually, I spoke to the visitors center and they put it together.
Nice.
Yeah.
Hey, is Poppy back? I think we would know that if we've made it back.
Yeah.
Are we all back in one place?
We are. We're all here.
Okay. I think just because I would like to end close to, if not on time, I am going to just wrap this up now with a moment of gratitude for everyone. To thank Indy Design Week for hosting this, to thank everyone for tuning in today. I think we had a really good attendance, and thank the participants, Brea, Kenneth, Heather, Rachel, Joanna, thanks so much for sharing of your time. Again, the only thing I can do without making a lot of noise is clap, so thanks so much for your time. But Poppy, this is the first day of Indy Design Week, and so we're just getting started with homeworks. We have 3 more sessions of these. So we hope that folks, everybody that has come to this is now in the Indy Design Week newsletter, so they'll get a note about what's happening the rest of the day today and tomorrow. And we really hope that everybody tunes in and continues on in our conversation at homeworks. So Poppy, maybe I'll just and follow Kenneth at DS4SI. We'll send a follow-up email out and to all the participants with some links to information as well. But Poppy, I'll let you have the last word then.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you all for attending and joining in the conversation. I think it was a really important conversation that we've had today, and I don't want it to end. So you can join our Slack channel to keep it up. There's a homeworks channel specifically. You should be able to check your email to find that out, or you can go to bit.ly/IndyDesignSlack and join there. And stay tuned. We have a whole week of really fun activities. Later tonight, we're doing an illustration throwdown. So 14 illustrators are going to be battling. It's a brand new experiment. We've never done it, like this whole thing. And we're going to be streaming the new Bauhaus and having a post-documentary commentary. So thank you all. I hope to see you around.
Thanks, folks. We'll see you later.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks again.
Thank you all.
See you, Rick.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
I'll give a thumbs up. Thanks, Randy. Hey, Johnny.
Johnny and Danny, are we staying on for the recap?
Yeah, if you would like to.
Yeah.
We have room until 4.
We have that room. Great.
Hey, Courtney.
Hey, everybody.
Hey, Courtney. Hi.
Hi, how are you, Rick?
Fine, thanks.
Oh, you turned on your video.
I did.
Just in time.
I'm going to go get another glass of water. Excuse me.
Goodbye, Richard.
Who's the host right now?
Oh,
Richard, no?
it's not me.
Richard's the host right now.
Okay, Bimbo or whatever just left, so I just didn't want to start talking with an interloper. Well, I think that went well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that was very interesting. Was your breakout session rich?
No, ours was like 5 people like,
Oh no.
I'm
I'm
gonna
just
go, I
watching.
guess.
I'm just watching.
Were your guys' breakout sessions good? Or
I think so. We had 2 women from who were students in landscape architecture at Cal Poly.
nice.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so it's like, oh, that was pretty far away.
Yeah.
I had the woman from Brussels.
All right, you win the geography prize. That's great
Yeah.
too.
I think I had someone named Till. I think he mentioned knowing Rich.
Yeah, he's my friend from Brussels. He's the curator of the Belgian Triennial.
Are they partners or something?
No, I used to be involved with something called the Khan Academy, not as in con man, but KAHN. It's a online educational source, and he and I connected through that, and we've stayed connected, through other folks.
I just realized we have 3 other people on the, yeah.
Can
Hi. It looks like by the usernames, it's Khan, Bimo, and Jennifer. Hey, folks.
Jennifer.
So I believe that Poppy is still the host.
Oh.
And that means that I can't kick anyone out.
Richard's the host. I can move people to a waiting room.
That would be lovely if you could do that.
Yeah.
Sorry, everyone else. Come back.
We could have just gone away from their keyboard,
I'm sure.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Do we want to keep recording this part or just kind of
Let's stop.
Mm-hmm.
Can you guys just